Good morning. We're going to look kind of through the side door at a one another. But boy, is it one that a lot of people struggle with and it's not talked about a lot. This is 2 Corinthians 10. We're going to look at verse 12. But again, a little context. We got to start in verse 7. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 7. Look at what is before your eyes. If anyone is confident that he is Christ, let him remind himself that just as he is Christ, so also are we. So Paul is vindicating his apostleship. There's people in Corinth who are probably trying to detract from that and sort of trump themselves up over Paul and his band of ministers. For even if I boast a little too much of our authority, which the Lord gave for building you up and not for destroying you, I will not be ashamed. I do not want to appear to be frightening you with my letters, for they say, quote, and they being those people who are opposing Paul and diminishing his authority, his letters are weighty and strong, but his bodily presence is weak and his speech of no account. So they're kind of trash talking with Paul. And they're saying, hey, he talks a big game, but when he shows up, he's a weakling. It says in verse 10, verse 11, let such a person understand that what we say by letter when absent, we do when present. Paul kind of returns a little trash talk here. They want to say, I talk a big game, but when I show up, I don't bring it. You know what? They'll find out next time I show up. Verse 12. Not that we dare to classify or compare ourselves with some of those who are commending themselves, but when they measure themselves by one another and compare themselves with one another, they are without understanding. They're trying to say we're better than Paul. We're stronger than Paul. Paul talks a game but doesn't bring it. We're the ones who bring it. Paul calls out the idea of comparison in general. And I think while this is specifically talking about these people who are challenging Paul's authority, I think there's a good application for us here about the general nature of, and the general, we call it kind of the demon of comparison. It's not helpful when you begin to compare yourself with others. And here's why, very simply put. You will never compare strength with strength. You always compare strength with weakness. So it ends in one of two ways. Either you compare your weakness with someone else's strength, and so you can digress into self-pity, feeling bad about yourself, feeling less than, and feeling as though you're always on the short end of the stick. It's not rooting your identity in Christ, it's rooting your identity in comparison to someone else. Secondly, you can compare your strength with someone else's weaknesses. Then you start to feel good about yourself, and you have a bloated sense of the self and an arrogant and prideful sense of the self. In one sense, both are pride because you're perseverating on yourself in comparison to others. But it's always a loss. Either you lose in terms of self-esteem or you lose in terms of pride and arrogance because you're rarely comparing strength with strength. It's always you over against somebody else and somebody wins in that way or somebody loses. Your identity is in Christ. Your value is in Christ. Your capacities are rooted in Christ. You are what you are because of Christ. So rest in Him and don't give in to any kind of demons, and I mean that metaphorically, of comparison is only going to destroy you. Instead, you get to fall before the cross and find your identity there. May the Lord bless you today.